Okay, today we are going to be modeling with polynomial equations. So let's look at this first problem. A construction company is planning to pour concrete for a rectangular driveway. The length of the driveway is 16 feet longer than its width. Find the width of the driveway if it has an area of 260 square feet. Okay, so let's pick out the important information about this problem. We know we're talking about the length of the rectangle, the width of a rectangle, and the area of the rectangle. Since we do not know the width, and we know the length in terms of its width, let's let the width be our variable. And so in this case, I'm just going to let the width of our rectangle be x. Then, if we go back and we read in the problem, right here it says the length of the rectangle is 16 feet longer than its width. Remember, that word means equals. So I've just brought up that part. The length is equal to 16 feet longer than its width. Since we've let the width be x, 16 feet longer than x would be x plus 16. And then it tells us that the area of this rectangle is 260 square feet. So what I like to do when I draw my diagram is just put the area in the middle, because remember, that is what area represents. It is this space inside, and we're not doing perimeter problems here, we are doing area problems. Okay, so since we know that area is the space inside the rectangle, our formula is length times width equals area. We can also set it up as width times length equals area, which in this case will be easier. So that way we do our monomial of x times our binomial x plus 16 equals the area of 260 square feet. All right, so we're now going to work out our problem. So the first step is that we're going to distribute. We're going to solve this equation by factoring. But in order to do that, we must distribute and put our equation in standard form, that trinomial in standard form, before we can solve. So x times x is going to give us x squared, and x times positive 16 is going to give us 16x, equal to 260. Now we're back to problems just like we learned how to solve yesterday. Step 1, we're going to set our equation equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 260 from each side. Make sure that we put this trinomial in descending order. So we have x squared plus 16x minus 260 equals 0. This is a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So we can use our shortcut method here. We're going to create two binomial sets, two sets of parentheses, where we put x in the front of each one. And then the next step is we're going to have to find what two numbers multiply to give us negative 260, but add to give us positive 16. And in this case, those factors would be 10 and 26. But we know that one of them needs to be negative. And in order for it to add to positive 16, you might want to put that positive right there, we would need it to be negative 10 and positive 26. So we're going to pop that in the back of our factors, minus 10 plus 26. All right, so going through the steps we learned yesterday, first step, we set our equation equal to 0. Step 2, we factor completely. Step 3, we set each factor equal to 0. And then step 4, we solve. So in the first one, we're going to add 10 to each side. And when we do that, we get that x is equal to positive 10. And then for our second one, we would subtract 26 from each side to get our final answer that x is equal to negative 26. Now, obviously, we can only have one width here. We can't have two widths. So we have to think about which one would make sense. It's not possible for our width to be negative. So in this case, because we are dealing with the dimensions of a rectangle, anytime you get a negative answer, it's not that you did anything wrong, it just doesn't make sense in the context of the problem. Always go back and make sure you reread your question. The question in this case is find the width, and we have set the width as x. So we have found our answer when we found x is 10. So our final solution would be that the width is equal to 10 feet, because the units in this case are feet. Now, when you go to do your Delta math assignment, they do not have you type in units, so be careful. If this was your problem, you would just type 10. Something I highly recommend you doing is checking your answer. If you've done all this work, make sure you go back and check your answer. If the width was 10, what would 10 plus 16 give us for the length? It would give us 26. Does that make sense? Does 10 times 26 give us 260? Yes, and we know we've done the problem correctly. Okay, let's look at the next problem. The length of a rectangle is 5 inches longer than its width. The area of the rectangle is 84 square inches. What is the length of the rectangle? Okay, so I want y'all to try to set this up on your own. Pause the video, and when you've set it up, start the video back. Okay, so in this case, the width is just going to be x, and then the length is written in terms of the width, 5 inches longer than the width, so it'd be x plus 5, and the area is 84. I really like to draw a picture. I think anytime we're doing the rectangle problem, triangle problem, or anything like that, a diagram is absolutely necessary. And really then you wouldn't have to write all this out. You could just draw your picture and label it. Since the length times the width equals the area, that's the same thing as width times length equals area. So x times x plus 5 is equal to 84. Now, try to work this out. When you're finished, restart the video and let's see how you did. Pause now. All right, so x times x is x squared. X times 5 gives us plus 5x equals 84. The next step is we want to set our equation equal to 0. So to do that, we're going to subtract 84 from each side. So we get x squared plus 5x minus 84 is equal to 0. Again, in this case, we have a nice trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So we can use the shortcut method to factor. Again, if you don't like the shortcut method, you can do it the long way by grouping or the box method. All right, so we have to find what two factors would multiply to negative 84, but ultimately add to positive 5. So we know the one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. So you have to start looking at your factors of 84. So the factors that we come up with are 7 and 12. 7 times 12 does give us 84. We know that one of them needs to be negative and it needs to add to positive 5. So to make that work, the 7 would be negative and the 12 would be positive. So we pop those in our factors. X minus 7, x plus 12. So we set our equation equal to 0, factor completely. Now we're going to set each factor equal to 0, and then we're going to solve. Most of you realize if you have these simple binomials where the x has a leading coefficient of 1, obviously it's just going to end up being the opposite sign. We're going to add 7 to each side and get x equals 7. We're going to subtract 12 from each side and get x equals negative 12. In this case, again, because we are talking about the dimensions of a rectangle, it's not possible for our width to be negative. So we would cross off the negative answer. That one's not possible. All right, before you get all excited and you box in 7 and go, that's my answer, always go back and reread the question. In this case, the question is, what is the length of the rectangle? So if you're doing this problem on Delta Math or in any assignment, if you type in 7, you're going to get the wrong answer because 7 represents the width of the rectangle. We let x be the width. That's why it's always important to go back and actually check your solutions. If the width of the rectangle is 7, then the length of the rectangle is going to be 7 plus 5, which is ultimately 12. And again, you can check yourself. Does 7 times 12 multiply to 84? Yes, it does. So make sure before you give your final answer that you reread what it's asking you for. And in this case, it was asking for the length. So the length of this rectangle is 12 inches. Again, on Delta Math, you will not type in inches. If you are doing this problem in Delta Math, you're only going to type 12. But be careful. Sometimes it might ask for the width. Sometimes it might ask for the length. And you've got to go back and substitute your answer that you got back in and make sure you're answering the correct one. Okay, so this problem's a little bit different. It says the difference of the square of a number and 4 is equal to 3 times that number. Find the negative solution. So this is like a little riddle, little translation. We got to start by translating that first sentence. All right, well, first of all, anytime they say of a number or that number, that is going to be your variable. So where we see the word number, that's where we're going to put x. Well, let's start by translating the first part, difference of the square of a number and 4. All right, well, guys, remember that word difference means to subtract. And anytime you see the word difference or sum, wherever the word and is where you put that subtraction or you put that addition. So the square of that number is going to be x squared, and then for the and we'll put minus 4. Okay, now we're going to translate 3 times that number. And that side's pretty easy. 3 times that number would just be 3 times x. Okay, and then these two phrases here, these two expressions are joined in the middle of this sentence with that is equal to. So we know that's where our equals is, so that's how we're going to set up our equation. X squared minus 4 is equal to 3x. All right, just like our problems above, now we're going to solve this equation by factoring because it's a quadratic equation with that square in it. So the method we use is the factoring method. To do that, we start with step 1. We have to set our equation equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 3x from each side. Make sure when you do this, though, that you position that negative 3x so that your trinomial will be in descending order. Sometimes you might have one that has a like term. In this case, we don't. But if you do have to add or subtract something that has a like term on the other side, make sure to stack it under it. So we get x squared minus 3x minus 4 is equal to 0. We end up with a trinomial again in this case. It's one of those simple trinomials. We can shortcut it to factor. What two numbers multiply to negative 4 and add to negative 3? Clearly, it's going to have to be 1 and 4, not 2 and 2. And for it to add to negative 3, it's going to have, the 4 will have to be negative. 1 times negative 4 multiplies to negative 4. 1 plus negative 4 adds to negative 3. So we now factor completely by creating our two sets of parentheses. We're going to stick an x in front of each one since this was just 1x squared in the front. We're going to pop our factors in, plus 1 minus 4. And then the next step is we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So we have x plus 1 equals 0, x minus 4 equals 0, and then we're going to solve. So that the first one, we'll subtract 1 from each side. We get x is equal to negative 1. For the second one, we'll add 4 to each side, and we get x is equal to positive 4. Remember, with these problems, go back and reread the question. In this case, it says find the negative solution. So our final answer will just be negative 1. It would not want us to give the positive solution in the end. So be really careful about that when you're doing your Delta math problems. Make sure that you look and read the question. If it says what are both solutions, then type both in. But most of them are going to say what is the length, what is the width, or what is the negative solution, what is the positive solution. So pay attention to that. So here's an example of one of them in Delta Math. The difference of the square of a number and 28 is equal to 3 times that number. Find the positive solution. You can see how similar this is to the problem we just did. The numbers are just a little different. But in this case, it asks for only the positive solution. So if you were to work this problem out, in the end, you would give the positive answer. Remember, you can always click this watch help video if you're having trouble, and it'll go through and explain how to do a problem. You can also, if you are doing a problem and you get it wrong, you can look at how to do it. So make sure you're using those resources while doing your assignment. Good luck.